Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. You guessed it, today I'm covering another 4K 240Hz QD-OLED gaming monitor, the Dell Alienware AW3225QF. In some regions this was the first display with this spec to hit the market, in several others it remains the cheapest option, and in today's review I'll be comparing it extensively with the ASUS and MSI models that I've already tested. The AW3225QF uses a variant of Samsung Display's 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD-OLED panel, which utilizes their 3rd gen panel technology. This means we're seeing many similarities between the Dell model and others, like rated 0.03 millisecond response times, per pixel local dimming, true HDR functionality with display HDR True Black 400 certification, and of course adaptive sync support. But Dell are also bringing some unique features to the table, like support for Dolby Vision out of the box, one of the first gaming monitors to support the spec. All of this can be had for $1,200 US, with surprisingly competitive and not outrageously inflated pricing in key regions like Europe. If Dell can stick the landing from a hardware and performance standpoint, there will be plenty of reasons to choose this monitor over the competition. Perhaps one of the biggest differences between the AW3225QF and the other monitors to use this QD-OLED panel is its curve. Samsung have produced both a curved and flat version of the 32-inch 4K panel. Most manufacturers have chosen the flat variant, while Dell have gone with the 1700R curved variant. This makes it stand out from the pack, but might also reduce its desirability among high-end buyers. Curved panels, especially those with the standard 16:9 aspect ratio, can be divisive, and whether you love or hate a curved panel is totally subjective. Flat panels tend to have broad appeal, but when a curve is introduced, there's always going to be a subset of buyers that hate the curve and will never buy it when flat alternatives exist. On the other hand, if you specifically want a curved screen, the Dell model becomes the standout and only choice with this spec. Personally, at this size and aspect ratio, I prefer a flat screen. For gaming, the curve is not a huge deal. At 1700R, it's a modest curve, notably less curved than the Samsung Odyssey monitors that opt for 1000R, and during gameplay you don't really notice it. But for productivity work and general desktop app usage, I prefer a flat screen as it introduces fewer distortions. These new 4K panels are the most suited to productivity we've seen yet from an OLED, and I feel the curve takes a little bit away from that. As for the rest of the design, I really like what Dell have done. This is absolutely a premium monitor with a build quality to match. Like their original 34-inch ultrawide, we're getting this nice two-tone effect where the front of the monitor is mostly black and dominated by the large 32-inch panel, while the stand legs and rear have significant white sections. Most of the outer surfaces are a nice high-quality plastic with a smooth minimalist finish that I think looks great. While still a relatively slim design, you don't get as much of the super thin OLED panel look on the AW3225QF as with the two flat versions from MSI and ASUS. I suspect this is to better support the curve. Also, this is the only one of the 3 models I've tested so far to use active cooling. It does appear to have a fan inside that spins at a slow speed. However, this fan has been virtually inaudible at all times, no fan noise issues here, so I don't expect buyers to find this annoying. I'm only mentioning it here for the silent PC enthusiasts that demand a product without active cooling. The stand is sturdy and supports a good range of motion, including height, tilt, and swivel. The maximum height on offer is decent. The stand with its 2 legs takes up a standard amount of desk space, nothing too outrageous for a monitor of this size. As for ports, we get one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, 2 HDMI 2.1 48GB/s ports with DSC, and several USB ports including 3 Type A and 1 Type C. Both DisplayPort and HDMI support the full 4K 240Hz experience, though DSC is required for both. The USB ports purely act as a hub. The USB-C port cannot be used as a display input. There's no KVM switch, and power delivery over USB maxes out at just 7.5 watts. Also worth mentioning is that the AW3225QF is a rare monitor that supports eARC for plugging in audio devices over HDMI. I've seen conflicting reports about whether this works, but I tried it with an NVIDIA Shield as the source device and a Samsung soundbar over eARC, and it worked for me. This was with the latest firmware as of this review, M2B103. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle on the bottom edge near the Alienware logo, and it's a fast, easy to navigate interface for the most part. Dell provides some game-specific features like a crosshair, sniper mode, refresh rate display, and shadow boosting, as well as a standard range of color controls. The OLED Care features are on the limited side though, with only pixel and panel refresh available to the user. Other burn-in prevention features appear to be enabled, they just don't have any user adjustability. Obviously, a big talking point with the new 4K QD-OLEDs is text quality. Moving to a 3840 by 2160 resolution at this size equates to 140 ppi, a 27% improvement in pixel density compared to 110 ppi 27-inch class 1440p OLEDs we had previously. Subpixel structure improvements introduced with 2nd-gen QD-OLED and carried through to this 3rd-gen panel also enhance the apparent pixel density for text and high contrast edges relative to 1st-gen panels and WOLEDs. I was genuinely quite impressed with the text clarity on this 4K QD-OLED monitor, which offers the same experience as others using this panel. The slight pink-green fringing you see on 1st-gen QD-OLED ultrawides, and to a lesser extent the 2nd-gen variants, is a lot less noticeable at this 140 ppi pixel density. As someone that found the fringing issues with initial QD-OLEDs more noticeable than others, I'd say it's almost a non-issue here and not something you'll spot in everyday usage, even when using the panel beside a traditional LCD with an RGB striped subpixel layout. Using it alongside a 32-inch IPS LCD, I thought the text clarity and quality from this QD-OLED was very similar, perhaps not quite as good or identical to the IPS, but good enough to satisfy me, and I think I'm pretty sensitive to this stuff. The text clarity here is good enough that you should be able to use the AW3225QF at a wide variety of scaling factors in Windows. The default is 150%, but I typically use a 32-inch 4K panel at 125%, and that looks great. Even at 100% scaling, text is very readable and doesn't suffer from artifacts that are too annoying. The smaller you go, the harder it is to keep up with LCDs, but I'd still give a tick here for 100% scaling usability. All up, I'd say this 32-inch 4K QD-OLED panel is the first OLED panel I've used to provide text clarity that isn't a downgrade from an equivalent LCD. For panel composition and coating, this is your classic Samsung QD-OLED panel experience, which is to say it's glossy with an anti-reflective surface treatment. While Samsung are calling this a 3rd generation QD-OLED panel, the composition appears identical to 2nd-gen QD-OLED, which itself is a small improvement over 1st-gen QD-OLED. What this means is the panel has the same issues described in previous QD-OLED reviews. In brighter environments where light sources are in front of the display, the panel has a tendency to reflect ambient light, raising blacks to the point where they appear somewhat grey. This impacts one of the key selling points to getting an OLED, which is its deep blacks. They just won't be that rich or deep in brighter conditions, especially relative to glossy WOLED panels. General reflection handling is decent, so mirror-like reflections aren't too bad, though being a glossy panel there is always going to be some amount of visible defined reflections which get worse the brighter the conditions are. However, the issues with the coating can be minimized by optimizing the placement of light sources in the room so that lights are behind the display. The darker the environment, such as gaming in a dim or fully dark room, the better this QD-OLED panel looks, and in dim conditions you will be typically getting a rich, deep OLED black experience. Personally, I do find it to be one of the larger issues with QD-OLED panels, but if you primarily game at night, it's not anywhere near as much of a concern. At the very least, it's something to be aware of. What's also important to be aware of is that OLEDs generally aren't great monitors for desktop usage, productivity apps, and web browsing because they are susceptible to permanent burn-in, and this new 4K QD-OLED is no exception. Anything with static content like toolbars or icons on screen for a long period of time, like you get with most desktop apps, is at risk of burning in. Conversely, dynamic content like gaming or watching videos is at practically no risk of burn-in, so don't worry about this if you're primarily using an OLED for gaming. Even the occasional bit of desktop app usage is fine, it's more 8 hours a day of productivity work that may lead to burn-in, and this is something we'll be exploring on the channel soon. As for burn-in warranty, Alienware offers 3 years of coverage that includes burn-in, the same as their competitors MSI and Asus, though some credit should be given to Dell here because they were the first to offer a burn-in warranty for QD-OLEDs, and that's really pushed other brands to follow suit. This warranty gives you some peace of mind that you should be able to use the display normally and not have to worry about burn-in, and if you do experience burn-in, you'll be able to file a warranty claim. With that said, we'd still recommend trying to minimize burn-in during usage, like minimizing the taskbar, setting the display to turn off after a short period of inactivity, and reducing static app usage. This should help extend the life of your monitor beyond the 3-year warranty period. In terms of response time performance, it's no surprise to see this QD-OLED panel offering lightning fast speeds, similar to other QD-OLEDs we've tested. At its maximum 240Hz refresh rate, we're seeing a 0.3 millisecond average response, which is extremely fast, and that leads to excellent motion clarity. With no noticeable inverse ghosting, this Dell model is on par with other OLEDs for speed, and superior to any LCD at the same refresh rate. You'll also notice better motion clarity at the highest refresh rate than first generation QD-OLEDs due to the increase from 175 to 240Hz. The best part of how OLEDs function is that performance is basically identical at all refresh rates. This means whether we're testing at 240, 120 or 60Hz, we're still seeing about a 0.3 millisecond response time average. LCDs typically get slower as the refresh rate decreases, but that isn't the case here. So the AW3225QF offers a single overdrive mode experience without any overdrive settings, of course, as they aren't required for an OLED. There is effectively no difference in response time performance between this QD-OLED and other OLED monitors. As the AW3225QF has a high 240Hz refresh rate, you can ensure when buying this display that its motion clarity is excellent. Where the big difference lies is between OLED and LCD. This Dell monitor is much faster than the fastest LCD I've tested, which is a big win for OLED, and it only gets better when looking at average performance. While LCDs do get a bit slower at lower refresh rates, OLEDs don't, so the gap between OLED and LCD grows. If you want a highly consistent gaming experience from your monitor, there's no better choice than an OLED. It's also good to confirm excellent cumulative deviation results, although no different from most other OLEDs. As expected, this really is the same technology that delivers the same response time performance as other QD-OLED ultrawides. Input latency is excellent, offering a sub 0.5 millisecond processing delay in both the SDR and HDR modes. Combined with fast response times and a high refresh rate, this OLED feels very snappy to use and is well suited to competitive multiplayer titles, although the resolution may prevent high levels of performance without upscaling. This is as fast as you'll get on a 4K monitor right now, although for extreme gamers there's also the dual mode 480Hz displays coming later in the year. We're about to test some 360Hz QD-OLEDs, and there's also 540Hz LCDs on the market at a 1080p resolution, plenty of choices for those that are latency sensitive. Power consumption is on the high side when displaying a full white image, although this is to be expected from OLED monitors, where full white is a worst case scenario. The Dell model is also really no different from the ASUS and MSI in terms of power. Full white power consumption is about 3 times what you'd see from a modern efficient 4K IPS LCD of the same size, such as the LG 32GR93U. Obviously not ideal for productivity work, though power consumption varies based on APL, so typical usage is going to be more in the 40 to 80 watt range, depending on how much white is on screen. That's still higher than the best LCDs of today, but not as outrageous. The color space on offer from these new 4K QD-OLEDs is very similar to previous QD-OLEDs. We're getting 99.1% coverage of DCI-P3 and 97.6% coverage of Adobe RGB, both strong results for work in those color spaces or for viewing HDR content. In total, I saw a 78.9% coverage of Rec 2020, which again, very similar to previous QD-OLEDs. This panel technology has a notably higher color gamut than WOLED, and there's an even higher discrepancy in HDR color volume, which also factors in brightness at various color outputs. QD-OLEDs can typically get much brighter than WOLED when displaying highly saturated colors. Factory calibration on the AW3225QF is decent. In its default out-of-the-box configuration, there isn't much of a noticeable tint in terms of color temperature, and gamma is reasonable, leading to a delta E ITP average of around 5.6. However, like with a lot of gaming monitors, the SDR mode does not use an sRGB or Rec 709 gamut clamp by default, so a lot of content will be oversaturated as it gets expanded up to fill the very wide gamut of this monitor. Some people like this effect, although it's not especially accurate and can cause issues with skin tones in YouTube videos, for example. Compared to other monitors, factory grayscale performance is good, pretty similar to the ASUS PG32 UCDM. Color checker performance is pretty similar between the 3 4K QD-OLEDs that I've tested so far, with results impacted in all situations by the relatively wide color gamut of these QD-OLED panels. Dell offer an sRGB mode through the Creator mode, which allows you to choose the color space and gamma. Setting it to sRGB with 2.2 gamma is the best way to go here, although there's no way to adjust white balance in this mode, so it's a more limited sRGB mode than you get on the ASUS model that comes fully unlocked. Nevertheless, the included sRGB mode is very good. A grayscale delta E of just 2.37 is excellent, with no notable issues in white balance or gamma. The gamut clamping is also very effective, reducing saturation significantly and leading to a delta E below 2 in saturation sweeps. A color checker delta E average of 2.96 is outstanding for a gaming monitor and indicates Dell have put in work to deliver a factory calibrated mode. Compared to other monitors, the AW3225QF is right up there with the best, including the MSI 321URX and the AW3423DWF in terms of grayscale performance. This model is also strong in color checker, delivering performance similar to the other QD-OLED models in a position that sits right up the top of this chart. The ASUS and MSI units are both slightly more accurate, but not to a point where you'll notice in daily usage. Calibration can be improved slightly through a full CalMan pass, though for most users I think the sRGB mode will be sufficient for SDR apps. Calibration in this way is more useful for those that need wide gamut support, as it can tidy up things here and there, and with 99% coverage of DCI-P3 you can get pretty good results if you want to work in that gamut, burn-in risk aside. Maximum brightness in the SDR mode is in line with other QD-OLED monitors at 239 nits for a full white image. This isn't overly bright compared to LCDs, but I found it sufficient for desktop usage in my well-lit office. The Dell model disables the automatic brightness limiter by default in the SDR mode, so this is effectively an always-on uniform brightness setting. However, what's interesting about the AW3225QF specifically is that Dell, in most display modes, appears to be permanently enabling the logo detection OLED care feature we've seen on other monitors. On the MSI and ASUS monitors, when this setting is enabled, typical brightness is reduced by 25 to 30 nits in most circumstances. However, both monitors allow you to disable this setting and get 240 to 250 nits of brightness all of the time. On the Dell model, this isn't the case, meaning in a lot of configurations, real-world max brightness drops from 239 nits to about 210 nits. This behavior was first pointed out in a video by Techless, so shout out to their channel. There is a workaround for this, which is to use the creator mode, aka the sRGB mode, which appears to disable this likely logo detection related brightness drop and gives you around 240 nits all of the time. But it's still not an ideal situation because if you want to use the other modes, you'll be stuck with lower real-world brightness. Dell should probably offer more adjustability to the OLED care features like we see from ASUS and MSI. Minimum brightness is good at just 25 nits, very sufficient for using the display at night. I was very impressed with the viewing angles of this panel. They are very wide, which makes it easy to view the display even at quite extreme angles. It really looks excellent. Uniformity was also very good with my unit, nice and uniform viewing full white and no dirty screen effect viewing dark greys. The Alienware AW3225QF is an excellent HDR display. This is due to OLED technology's inherent hardware qualities that are tailor-made for displaying HDR content. The key feature here is that each individual pixel is self-lit, meaning at a pixel level the display can turn on or off to accurately display everything from dark shadows to bright highlights. When the display needs to show pure black, it can fully switch off, giving us the trademark rich zero-level blacks and deep shadows that OLED is known for. This is in contrast to most HDR-capable LCD panels, which are not fully controllable at the pixel level. LCDs require a backlight, and for HDR displays this typically means the use of full-array local dimming, a technology that splits the backlight into zones. Whereas OLED can turn off each pixel individually, LCDs with local dimming can only turn off certain zones, encompassing hundreds or even thousands of pixels. This can still be effective for HDR content and look great, but it has some fundamental flaws in difficult circumstances. For example, when showing a bright and dark element close together, an OLED can control each pixel as needed with a clean, accurate distinction between bright and dark. LCDs with local dimming need to masterfully control the zones to achieve the necessary distinction between bright and dark, and when the element is too small or not in the optimal position, the bright element can spill into the dark area within the backlight zone, creating ugly blooming artifacts. OLED therefore has the edge when it comes to displaying clean HDR content with minimal blooming or haloing. In some scenes, this will be the difference between raised blacks and deep blacks, such as for star fields and Christmas lights. At other times, OLED can have a brightness advantage for small bright objects within a dark scene. Subtitles will look cleaner on an OLED with reduced blooming, and generally OLEDs produce richer shadows thanks to its inherently higher contrast ratio. Aside from brightness and shadow detail, OLEDs also have other advantages for HDR. As there are no backlight zones, OLEDs are faster to transition between bright and dark with no visible zone transitions. OLEDs are much less likely to suffer from backlight flickering, although light PWM behavior, especially when using a variable refresh rate, is common, and OLEDs like this one do not increase input latency in its HDR mode, as they do not need to run a backlight zone algorithm. As for HDR configuration, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is Dolby Vision. I've seen many reports related to this monitor talking about the Dolby Vision mode being bugged, specifically the Dolby Vision mode being enabled when it shouldn't be or being stuck on, for example when playing normal HDR10 games or using the Windows 11 Auto HDR feature. This is problematic because viewing HDR10 content in the Dolby Vision mode leads to incorrect raised brightness as tone mapping is occurring where it shouldn't be. For example, this is the EOTF curve for HDR10 in the Dolby Vision game mode, showing significantly raised brightness. There's also the Dolby Vision dark mode, which does a much better job of EOTF tracking, but caps brightness to around 450 nits, not the full 1000 nits the monitor is capable of. In either case, pushing HDR10 into the Dolby Vision mode is not ideal. Only real Dolby Vision content should be seen in this mode. HDR10 content should use the HDR10 mode. The question is whether or not this is a bug and whether or not it's Dell's fault. I've also seen the GPU manufacturers, e.g. Nvidia and AMD, blamed for this due to bugged drivers. However, this is one of the weird situations where the monitor, in this case the AW3225QF, is actually working correctly, and it's the fault of the source device. The real culprit here is Microsoft and how they are choosing to configure Windows when a Dolby Vision display is connected. What's happening is Windows is defaulting to outputting a Dolby Vision signal all of the time, only switching over to outputting an HDR10 signal in some exclusive full-screen applications. In all other situations, like windowed apps or borderless windowed gaming, Windows appears to be outputting a Dolby Vision signal even if the content is HDR10, rather than switching to HDR10 when content on screen is HDR10. So what's happening is Windows is outputting a Dolby Vision signal when it really should be outputting an HDR10 signal. This is being correctly passed through by the GPU drivers as Dolby Vision, and the monitor is correctly switching over to the Dolby Vision mode and showing the content as Dolby Vision, because Windows is telling it to do that. Whereas what should be happening is either Windows should be defaulting to HDR10 and switching to Dolby Vision output only for Dolby Vision content, or it should be switching to an HDR10 signal output when HDR10 content is on screen. This is typically how other source devices work, like Blu-ray players or media streaming boxes. They will always switch modes to match the content being played. The way Microsoft is currently handling Dolby Vision in Windows is flawed in my opinion. They've struggled for years to properly support HDR displays, so I guess it's no surprise to see this happening again, but it is causing some issues for the AW3225QF and presumably future Dolby Vision monitors. It's frustrating because using other input devices is pretty flawless on this monitor. I had no issues properly showing HDR10 and Dolby Vision content on my Nvidia Shield over HDMI because it always switches into the right mode. On Windows, it's common to run into the problem because there are so few real Dolby Vision games on Windows, so most of the content is HDR10. The workaround for this issue is a Dolby Vision toggle which was introduced to the AW3225QF through a firmware update just a few days ago, version M2B103. This isn't so much fixing a bug in the firmware, more Dell providing an additional feature to work around poor Dolby Vision configurations like Windows. You turn Dolby Vision off, Windows doesn't know it's a Dolby Vision monitor anymore and sends a standard HDR10 signal instead, and everything works well. Of course, the downside being that you'll need to turn the toggle back on if you want to use Dolby Vision. Beyond this, I think there will need to be further improvements to the Dolby Vision PC ecosystem as more monitors ship with Dolby Vision support. Windows needs to improve how it handles Dolby Vision and when it sends out HDR signals, and I think a software-side toggle to enable Dolby Vision pass-through, whether it's in Windows or the GPU driver, would be a good idea. However, I still think providing Dolby Vision support is a good thing, as it means proper compatibility with the increasing range of dynamic tone-mapped content, especially TV shows and movies from streaming services. Right now, the best way to access that is through a media player other than a Windows PC. All of the Dolby Vision stuff aside, when the AW3225QF actually uses the HDR10 mode, the results are very good. The best HDR mode is the Peak 1000 mode, which provides up to 1000 nits of peak brightness on both Nvidia and AMD GPUs. This mode has good EOTF tracking at a 10% window size, though roll-off occurs a bit too early. At a 2% window size, EOTF tracking is very good, and general color performance in the HDR mode is above average, better than the MSI model, not quite as strong as the Asus model. Brightness in the HDR mode is effectively identical to other QD-OLEDs. Full screen white hits 248 nits, 10% window brightness is 460 nits, and 2% window brightness reaches 1002 nits. We've seen this sort of performance before, no difference to other 4K QD-OLEDs we've tested so far. Real scene brightness was okay, coming in at 313 nits in Scene 1, higher than the ASUS model but below the MSI model. In Scene 2 I recorded 807 nits, which was around 100 nits below the other QD-OLED models, though in games I saw just shy of 1000 nits of real world brightness. In most areas I tested, this monitor is capable of similar brightness to the other QD-OLEDs that I've tested, which is as expected. Final section of this review is the new Hub Essentials Checklist 2.0. In this first part, we're assessing how accurate Dell's spec sheet is and also providing some additional information ourselves. In general, Dell do a great job of advertising this monitor outside of unrealistic response time numbers. Dell claim factory calibration, and that appears to be true in the sRGB mode. Obviously, the monitor is capable of true HDR, and brightness specs, while limited, are accurate. The second section is our feature support matrix. It's no surprise to see an OLED performing well in the motion and contrast areas with lots of green ticks. I gave Dell a borderline result for brightness, as in some modes you can't reach 250 nits, as well as flickering, because I did see some very minor OLED PWM flicker in one game I tested that wasn't present on the MSI or ASUS models. Dell also missed a few key features such as USB-C input and power delivery, a KVM switch, and the ability to disable DSC. However, it was good to see some areas that Dell gets right. For example, they are the first of the 3 monitors tested to actually support Dolby Vision, compatibility issues with Windows aside. The sRGB mode is very well calibrated, there's a good burn-in warranty, and text clarity is excellent from an OLED. Overall, the Dell Alienware AW3225QF is another excellent 4K QD-OLED gaming monitor. This doesn't come as a surprise given I was also impressed with the MSI and ASUS variants, and the Dell model uses the exact same panel technology. But it's good to confirm that typically speaking, regardless of which model you get, you'll be treated to a premium HDR gaming experience that's unlike what we've had access to in prior years. The AW3225QF uses the same QD-OLED technology we've come to love over the last 18 months, offering elite response time speeds, 1000 nits of peak brightness, and superb HDR performance, along with a few flaws, just scaled up to a new size and resolution. I don't think 4K gaming has ever looked this good or this clear. At 240Hz, this panel offers elite motion clarity with plenty of room for future PC hardware upgrades. Even today though, you can access the benefits of what this display offers at a lower refresh rate, where QD-OLED still looks great. Like other variants using this panel, the Alienware model is well suited to all types of gaming. Competitive multiplayer fans can enjoy the high refresh rate, low input latency, and very good motion clarity of this display, while having the flexibility to run it up to a clear 4K resolution if you want to. For single-player gamers, the rich deep blacks, per-pixel local dimming, and bright highlights all contribute to a stunning, high-resolution true HDR experience, all while maintaining elite clarity and motion. The increased pixel density from this panel has huge benefits for text clarity and productivity work as well, although there are still risks using an OLED for static desktop apps, something we'll be exploring soon. Dell are continuing to offer their 3-year burn-in warranty for peace of mind, which is great to see. What was good to confirm with the Alienware model is that Dell have kept pace with other brands in key areas to performance tuning and calibration. The sRGB mode provided with this display is excellent, and HDR accuracy was also strong with great compatibility across GPU brands. From a pure performance perspective, there's very little difference between the 3 models I've tested so far, so whichever way you go, you'll be getting a fantastic experience, something we rarely see even comparing monitors using the same panel. While there are plenty of similarities between the variants, the Dell model has some quite notable differences to end up being the most unique offering. The big change here is offering a curved panel instead of flat, either great news or bad news depending on your preferences. If you specifically want a curved panel, the Alienware model is the only one with a curve, so it's an easy decision. If you're like me though and prefer a flat display at this size and aspect ratio, it's a pretty significant sticking point that tempts me away from the AW3225QF and towards either the MSI or ASUS models instead. There are also several key feature differences. The Alienware variant is the only to actually support Dolby Vision right now, although ASUS have promised support through a future firmware update. This is both a blessing and a curse with the way Windows handles Dolby Vision, though Dell has mitigated this through a firmware update allowing users to toggle Dolby Vision on and off. I think this will be a nice feature to have as the Dolby Vision ecosystem continues to mature. On the other hand, the AW3225QF does not come with a KVM switch, USB-C display input, or good levels of power delivery, and it's the only one of the monitors I've tested so far that features active cooling. It also lacks the ability to disable DSC and has no black frame insertion functionality. All of these things come with the feature-rich ASUS PG32U CDM. If there's any one of these features that you need, you'll have to look elsewhere. Based on these feature differences, the curve and a few quirks with brightness and so on, right now I'd have the Dell monitor in third place of the three variants I've looked at. This feels a bit harsh because really this isn't a last place monitor, it's still a very good gaming display overall. However, the overall package offered with MSI, or especially ASUS, is more aligned with what I prefer in a gaming monitor. I'm sure some of you will have a different opinion based on what you like, it's really that close between the models. It's also hard to say which way to go when factoring in price. In the US, this is a mid-priced offering at $1,200 US, the MSI variant is much cheaper at $950 US and is still the clear standout. In Europe or Australia though, the Alienware model is notably cheaper. For example, I can buy an AW3225QF right now for about 1,900 Aussie dollars, versus 2,200 for the MSI 321URX and over 2,500 for the PG32U CDM. I think pricing in Australia is fair, and it's certainly nice to see Dell offering much more reasonable prices outside the US than you get from MSI or ASUS. But when it comes to high-end monitors, I can totally see some people just choosing to spend whatever it takes to get the specification they want. If I was already facing spending at least $1,900 dues, it doesn't seem that outrageous to spend the extra 15% to get the flat panel that I want with otherwise similar performance. It's going to be a case-by-case basis though, and I definitely wouldn't rule out the Alienware model given what it's offering. Anyway, that's it for this review of the Alienware AW3225QF. Again, more QD-OLED testing is coming up on the channel soon. We'll be getting to those 27-inch 360Hz monitors, so if you do want to see those reviews, then the best way to get those in your inbox is to subscribe. If you do want to support our independent testing as well, we have our Float Plane and Patreon accounts. Links to those are in the description below. If you sign up, not only will be supporting the channel and making these monitor reviews, but you'll also get access to some cool benefits and perks like our Discord community, our monthly live streams, ICC profiles, and plenty of other good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.